Hello, everybody. I say everybody, I don't know if there's anybody there or not. So welcome to this latest session on the Pathlight Thrive Hive. Tonight we have got Jackie Bennis coming back for her second visit in the Hive. She's a psychotherapist, and last time she was talking about living with a narcissist. That's a great one to look up on either my YouTube channel or back in the Hive recordings. If you didn't catch that one, it was really interesting. Tonight, it's all about accessing and healing the inner child, and we all have one within us, and it's pretty much going to be needing some healing if you haven't done so already. So I imagine this is going to be really interesting, and it's probably going to help me with my next college essay too, so I should be taking some notes. No, I won't. Mental notes. So welcome. And yeah, I'm going to do a bit of sales blurb as I normally do. So we have got a mental health first aid course coming up through my company, Pathlight Limited. And tomorrow, not tomorrow, I keep thinking it's Tuesday today for some reason. I don't know why. But Wednesday is the last day to book onto this. We've got some slots available if you fancy becoming a mental health first aider. It's a wonderful course. You can use it to identify the signs and symptoms of mental health issues in your friends, family, and colleagues. You can learn how to support them, how to approach them, start that difficult conversation around mental health, and how to signpost them to appropriate support whilst keeping yourself safe and learning lots and lots about different mental health issues and self-care as well, which is really important. And the recovery model as well. So lots of stuff there. It's a wonderful course. It starts on the 13th of June, 4 mornings, plus some solo study that you have to do yourself on the Mental Health First Aid England online learning portal. So do come along. If the cost, £280, is a barrier to you, then please send me a message and we'll see what we can work out for you. The more the merrier, and the more mental health first aiders we can get out there into the world is a wonderful thing, because early intervention is key with all mental health issues. So the more people that are trained up in this area, the better. So that's enough of that one. Give me a shout if you fancy it. It's yeah, links on the Hive and also on my website, pathlight.org.uk. And as usual, if you'd like to share the group with all of your network, that would be wonderful. Thank you very much. And feel free to invite people directly using the invite button on the Facebook page if you think that they would benefit from being here. And finally, give some dosh, go on. Give some money, go on. Oh, goodness me. It's been a giggly day in our household today. So if you are enjoying the Hive and you would like to become a member, a subscriber, and you haven't done so already, it's easy to do so. Just go to buymeacoffee.com/thrivehive and you can send us £7 a month, and that helps to keep this thing sustainable. Or you can just buy me a coffee each time you've enjoyed a session, and that costs you £3. I've no idea how much coffee costs if you go to Costa and stuff, because I don't do stuff like that. But I'm guessing it's around about £3. Anyway, that's all of that. If you have any questions as we go through this evening's session, then do just feel free to plonk them in the comments box. And if you haven't done so already, you can, if you like, go to this link, this streamyard.com/Facebook link, and that will give StreamYard, this software, permission to use your name if you want us to know who you are whilst you're commenting. Don't worry if you don't want to, not a problem. Already, I can see we've got Myril here and we've got Karen here, so welcome. Feel free just to say hello or ask any questions as we go through. So that's enough talking from me. I'm going to hand over to Jackie. Well, welcome, Jackie, first of all. So, yes, welcome back, Jackie Bennis.
Hi, Paul. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you for coming back. Much appreciated again for you to give up your time and bestow lots of expertise on this. And I know this is one of your subjects that you're very passionate about.
It is, but I'm sharing a lot of other people's expertise tonight. But it is a passion of mine, and it's a really important subject, and it's huge. So should I just get going?
Well, I suppose for the people who didn't see your first talk, would you be happy just to give yourself a brief introduction?
Yeah. I studied at the Centre for Counselling and Psychotherapy Education in Maida Vale, London. Started my studies in 2006 and ended a 4-year diploma 2005 I started and ended my diploma in 2000. And then I went on, and this is a diploma in psychotherapy. And then I went on to do a supervision training to be a supervisor, to supervise therapists, and a few other trainings, a couples counseling training, and EMDR, and you know, as you do, you just keep adding stuff because it's all good. It's all good experience. Mm-hmm. So I live in Barcelona, and the air conditioning's on because it's getting a bit sticky here now. So this is the inner child, and this is part 1. I will do a part 2. I'll try not to talk too quickly so that you can fully understand everything. And I'll be quoting. Well, let me just say before I get started that even though I greatly admire experts in trauma, addiction, codependence, like Gabor Mate in Canada and Robert Lefebvre in London, tonight I've used John Bradshaw, who has written many books, but the first book he wrote was called Healing the Shame That Binds You. And Pia Mellody, who is an expert in codependence, and Alice Miller, who also goes way back and wrote a book, a really fabulous book called The Drama of Being a Child. So, you know, I just want to say that everything that happens to us in our childhood has intergenerational connections to our parents and their parents and their parents and so on. And during this talk, you know, I am no way judging parents or criticizing parents, because they did what they could with the tools they had. And, you know, very often they had very few tools at their disposal, and they came from a place of their own parental mirroring. So to start with, I would like to do an adaptation of a John Bradshaw visualization on the inner child, and I think his is about 45 minutes long, and I'm not going to put you through that, so you don't have to worry too much. It's going to be about 5 minutes, and it's up to you whether you want to do it or not, or whether you just want to listen. So for those that want to do it, I would invite you to close your eyes and take some really deep breaths. Deep breath in, deep breath out, and really let go of the day. And as you're breathing in and out, just be aware of how your chest moves as you breathe in, and again as you breathe out. And then keep on breathing and just turn within. So let go of the day, let go of any thoughts, you know, because you can't do it correctly if you're thinking about the list of stuff you've got to do or anything like that. So just try and concentrate on the breaths. And then I'd like you to imagine a home you lived in when you were around 8 years old. So try and get a picture of the house that you lived in when you were around that age. Notice the windows. Notice you know, whether the house is brick or whether it's timber, or how the house looked, how you can remember this house. And look at the windows, pay attention to familiarize yourself with how many windows there are in the front of the house, and notice the door, the front door. What color is it? How does it look? Is it wood? Is it metal? Just take your time and pay attention. Really bring up that image of your house. And then imagine that you're standing next to you. You're standing in the middle of your parents. So you have a parent at either side of you, or caretakers, whoever was responsible for bringing you up at that point in your life. And then have a good look at yourself. You see the 8-year-old you standing there. Just notice the clothes that you're wearing. Notice the texture of the clothes. Is it winter? Is it summer? Are the clothes light? Are the clothes heavy? And then notice your shoes. What color are your shoes? So get a good look at yourself. You can notice how your hair looks. Really tune into that 8-year-old you. Now, imagine that your adult self is standing at the bottom of the gate, by the gate at the bottom of the garden or the bottom of the boundary of the house, and you walk towards your adult self. And then you go for a walk. And the walk takes you down a long path until you reach a beautiful meadow. Notice the flowers gently swaying in the breeze. Really take it in. Take in your surroundings and notice everything. And then eventually you come to a clearing and you stop. So you're standing next to your adult self. And then your adult self tells you this: I am here from your future, and there's an important message I want you to know. I shall be with you, watching over you always, and giving you all the love in my heart. Of all the people you will meet on your journey as you grow up, I want you to know that I will never leave you. You're suddenly aware that you're becoming smaller and smaller and smaller until your adult self picks you up and places you next to their heart forever. Just stay with that image for a moment. And when you're ready, open your eyes. Come back into the room. In the epilogue of John Bradshaw's book, Homecoming, he writes this: the movie E.T. was loved by millions. When masses of people exhibit such energy for something, there's often some deep archetypal pattern it has stirred up. One scene especially tapped our collective unconscious. When the abandoned E.T. whispers, "Home, Elliot, home," his words touch the exact symbol that evokes our deep archetypal longings. When E.T. whispered, "Home, Elliot, home," millions of every age in every culture wept. We wept because we are still divine infants in exile. No matter how hard we work to reclaim and champion our inner child, there's a level of emptiness and absence in us all. You have to forgive me, I have to look at my notes, otherwise I'll make some terrible errors.
It's fine.
So in Healing the Shame That Binds You, first of all, I'll start with a quote from Alice Miller from The Drama of Being a Child. This is a fabulous book. The need to identify with someone, to feel a part of something, to belong somewhere is one of our most basic needs. When children have shame-based parents, they identify with them. This is the first step in the child's internalizing shame, unquote. Shame is internalized when, I've nearly made a mistake. Wait a minute. Let me just double check. Yes, I have. Well, I can tell you this bit first. Shame is internalized when one is abandoned. Children cannot know who they are without reflective mirrors. Abandonment includes the loss of mirroring. So here is another quote from Mr. Bradshaw. The children in a dysfunctional family take on rigid roles necessitated by the family's need for balance. For example, if a child is not wanted, he or she will try to balance the family by not being any trouble, by being helpful, perfect, super responsible, or invisible. This is the lost child. It is a dysfunctional role. I'm going to speak about family dynamics in part 2 because he refers to family dynamics here. And then he goes on to say, the felt experience of shame is the feeling of being exposed and seen when one is not ready to be seen. Toxic shame is often manifested in dreams of being naked in inappropriate places. I used to have a lot of those 30 years ago. Or in not being prepared, as in suddenly having to write your final exam without having prepared for it. As toxic shame develops, the child stops trusting his own eyes, judgment, feelings, and desires. These faculties form our basic human power. The distrust of our basic faculties results in the feeling of powerlessness. This chronic stage of agony cannot be endured for long. Our basic automatic defense cover-ups will be triggered. Once these defenses have been triggered and are in place, they chase our true and authentic self into hiding. We develop a false identity out of this basic care. We become master impersonators. We avoid our core agony and pain, and over a period of years, we avoid our avoidance. So, no, all right, okay. So I'm going to give you a couple of examples of shaming behavior. It must be at least 10 years ago now. It might be a little bit longer. I was in John Lewis in London, waiting in the queue, and in front of me there was a man with his little boy who was about 8 or 9 years old. And his wife and daughter were standing waiting, and he was in the middle, the father was in the middle of paying for his goods. And the boy was kind of pestering his dad because I think he wanted his father to buy something for him. So he kept saying, please, please, dad, please, dad. And I would suspect that there was something had annoyed his father previously. I don't think it was just the child that was annoying him at that particular point in time. I would suggest his father was already holding some anger over something else. Maybe he wanted to watch the football and his wife had dragged him out to the shops. Who knows? But the kid suddenly touched one of his dad's jacket pockets, which I presume had some money in. And he didn't put his hand in the pocket. He just touched the pocket. And the father just exploded and screamed at the kid. And the little boy immediately burst into tears. And the cashier and I, our eyes met in horror. Oh, God, look at couldn't believe this was happening. And the kid, I watched this child just shrink. He just started to shrink as he stood there. I mean, it was awful. It was really awful. I mean, this is a trauma. This is a real trauma. And I remember I got out finally. They left, of course, and then I finished my business and went out and went about doing what I was doing. But the scene kept coming back to me. And it came back to me 3 or 4 times that day. I couldn't get it out of my head. I'd forget a bit and do something, and then wham, it would be back in again. And I mean, I remember it now after so long, I remember it vividly, like it was yesterday, like it happened yesterday. And I think what happened to me was I suffered a secondary trauma. The child suffered the first trauma, the primary trauma, but I suffered a secondary trauma because I couldn't get it out of my head. And this is how a parent shames a child. And it's not only shaming, it's in this particular instance, it was a trauma. And I'm wondering now, this boy must be maybe 20, 21 or something. I wonder how that has affected his life, because I'd be very surprised if that was the only instance when his dad blew up in front of him.
Yeah, and I wouldn't be surprised if he remembers it as vividly as you do, Jackie.
Oh, I'm sure. Well, he could have numbed out of it, of course, but as soon as something happens to him in his world today, he will revisit that place. He will revisit all his feelings of shame and everything that went with it. And the second example is quite a simple example. It's something I saw on Facebook, and it's a relative of my daughter-in-law's. I don't know this lady, but she had posted up some photos that obviously had been taken from some women's magazine, showing women in supermarkets inappropriately dressed. So really skimpy tops, tight leggings, just inappropriate. Some almost looked like they were in bathing costumes with tiny little shorts. And all the women were obese. All these photos of the women were obese. And by the time I looked at it, some of this lady's friends who had posted this, some of her friends had come back with saying things like, oh my God, how can they go out like that? Isn't that dreadful? This kind of thing. And of course, me and my big mouth, I made a comment and I said, this is appalling. This is just dreadful, shaming these people like this. And she came back to me and she said, oh, I know. I normally don't post things like that, but this time, somebody sent it to me, kind of thing. But she does post things like that because I've seen other posts from her in a similar vein. So this is, again, people really shaming people. And I noticed today some people have a terrible habit when they're talking about people they don't know, people who they don't really approve of, and they talk about fatties, those fatties. And my stomach just turns over when I hear people talking like this. It's dreadful. So,
yeah, it's judging people, isn't it? And
well, it's a terrible judgment,
yeah.
and it's, you know, they don't, even though they don't know these people, nor will they ever meet these people, it makes them feel superior, that, you know, they're not in this position, they don't look like this, and so they think they have the right to make these remarks, which is not correct. It's just not right. But shame-based people do this. They illuminate stuff, showing other shame-based people's behavior to make themselves, as I say, feel superior, and to deny their own shame, which is evident by their judgmental and critical responses to anything like this. So let's move on to another aspect of shame. And this is in addictive relationships, what we call a caretaking and helping mode. And it doesn't, I'm not trying to say here that people who help other people and take care of them, they've all got an ulterior motive, or it's all a distortion of being good or whatever. But when it's an addiction, it is distorted. So I'm just going to read what Bradshaw says about this, because he makes some valid points. Caretaking and helping. Strange as it seems, taking care of helping another person often intensifies their shame. Caretaker is a common family system role. The caretaker helper actually doesn't help the other person at all. Helpers are always helping themselves. A person who feels flawed and defective feels powerless and helpless. Such a person can alter their feelings of defectiveness by helping and taking care of others. When they are caretaking others, they feel good about themselves. So the goal of the caretaker is the caretaking, not the good of the person being cared for. The caretaking is an activity that distracts one from one's feelings of inadequacy. Distraction is a way to mood alter. Caretaking and helping as defensive strategies against toxic shame lead to enabling or rescuing. A caretaking spouse of an alcoholic actually enables the alcoholic's disease, thereby increasing his toxic shame. Parents often enable or rescue their children, doing for them what they could do for themselves. The children wind up feeling inadequate and defective. Rescuing or enabling is robbery. It robs the other person of a sense of achievement and power, thereby increasing toxic shame.
So it's not allowing that person to have their autonomy, is it? It's treating them as a lesser being.
No, and it can go into all kinds of ways, like I saw something tonight, and it really reminded me of another aspect of that. An over-caring parent, I had them, overprotective parents, and the child grows up not daring to do anything for itself, because the minute it tries, the parents are there saying, oh no, you'll hurt yourself, oh no, we have to do it. And it's the worst thing to do, but parents don't know. They're doing it, they think they're coming from a loving place, and they think they're doing the best. But I also saw something tonight where a mother was distressed, and her daughter kept bringing her little presents. And she brought her little presents, and the mother was trying to have a conversation, and the child kept coming in with a little cake or a little something for a mother. And I realized, this child has picked up, the mother is distressed, but she's picked up the mother's anxiety. And now she is anxious, and she is doing exactly this. She's caretaking for her mother, only she's not doing it from a dysfunctional way. She's doing it because she really loves her mother and cares for her mother. But the mother has simply passed on the anxiety now to her child unknowingly. She just thinks her child is being very sweet and nice and caring, which she is. But it's because the child has picked up the anxiety, the mother's anxiety. So, right, where am I? See, I got lost now. All right, yes. So, when I read the passage about the caretaking and the enabler, I was very much reminded of a relationship of a relative of mine. And the girl has suffered from anorexia since she was 18 years old. And she's now in her late 30s. And she's married to an absolutely lovely man. He's a really lovely man. But he is an enabler. He fits very much into the enabler mode. So he goes along with everything she wants. He watches her consuming liters of water every day to fill her stomach up. He watches her doing 2-hour exercise workouts every morning. He watches her avoiding food. She actually isn't very keen to eat with other people because they will notice how little she eats. She does eat, and he's always making excuses for her. So I suspect that because of his own conditioning, of his parenting and conditioning, that his biggest fear is that if he disagrees or tries to make her look at something in a different way, she might abandon him. And so he goes along. And it's really hard to sit there and watch this play out. It's really, really hard. She comes from really shame-based parents, and she had no control when she was growing up. She was totally controlled and manipulated. So this is the result. But this is what Bradshaw writes about anorexia. Anorexia is most dominant in affluent families with daughters aged 13 to 25. I mean, this is an approximation, and he says so later on. It can apply to anybody, but he's just using this example in this particular place. Within families which are dominated by perfectionism. Affluent families are often focused on self-image actualizing. Respectability and upper class have a very special look and image to keep up with. The following patterns predominate. 1, perfectionism. 2, non-expression of feelings, and in brackets, no talk rule, bracket. 3, a controlling, often tyrannical father or mother. 4, an obsessive mother or father, completely out of touch with his or her sadness and anger. 5, a pseudo-intimate marriage with great pretense at looking good. 6, great fear of being out of control. in the whole family system. 7, enmeshment and cross-generation alliances. So these factors appear in various combinations, as I just said. And the anorexic is a metaphor of what's wrong with the family. So he goes on to say, anorexia is an attempt to be 1, in control, 2, to deal with severe emotional loss by control, 3, self-suppression on the part of the daughter, and 4, anger taken out on the self. The function of an addiction is to remove intolerable reality and pain. Okay. Do you want to ask if there are any questions? Because I'm now going to go on to talk a bit about codependence.
Yeah, thank you, Jackie. So yeah, if you've got any questions, folks, just pop them into the comments. I can see Meryl saying, hi, Jackie. Karen, going back to what we were discussing earlier, says that she became the super responsible, perfect, helpful, invisible child. So that was her adaptation. And someone saying, yes, we should not be judgmental. Amen to that. So I'm just thinking about the anorexia there as a response to such a controlling family, controlling parental figure, and it's
usually controlling mother. But
is it? Right.
Yeah, but I mean, you know, obviously in some cases it will be controlling, can be controlling narcissistic father.
Mm-hmm. I suppose that's the ultimate expression of what Gabor Maté says around addiction being the opposite of connection, because in such a family where emotions are not talked about and there's no intimacy, there's no real intimacy between the children and the parents, or either of the parents, where do all the emotions go? It just becomes a mask. It's the ultimate mask, isn't it?
Absolutely. And it's a no-go area to talk about feelings. Feelings just are not talked about. And of course, there's a great deal of perfectionism in this kind of control as well, and particularly with narcissists, because there's a great thing about needing to be perfect. Everything has to be perfect, the best. Everything has to be the best. So I don't know if anybody's got a pen and paper, because I'm going to be reading out some questions.
Folks, go and get yourself a pen and paper if you haven't got one. Karen's got a question for you, Jackie, which is, do you have any advice that you would give the man who enables his anorexic wife?
I couldn't possibly, because he's in denial. So I couldn't. I'm too close to them anyway, so it wouldn't be appropriate. But he's totally in denial, and it would just, God, it would be like throwing a bomb in. I mean, you know, they would never speak to me again if I opened my mouth and said something. So it's very painful to watch. I mean, for me, it's extremely painful to watch, because I'm very aware of what's happening and the dynamic that's going on. But no. I mean, it's a tricky one. It's when someone is terribly enmeshed in this kind of dynamic, it is extremely tricky. The only way they can, you know, somebody could recommend that if you say, you know, have you thought about going for counseling? I mean, they're going to ask you, why do you think I need counseling? You know, so it's really hard to, you know, maybe a really good friend, if they were aware enough, would be able to say, you know, it's funny, isn't it? I notice that every time you're together, you're doing this, or you're saying that, or it sounds like you're making excuses all the time, or it sounds like you're trying to make everything okay. And I wonder why you do that. But it depends how deeply embedded somebody is in that position. And if they're in total denial, they will just get angry. They won't understand. They'll think they're being criticized. They'll think they're being unfairly treated. It's really tricky. It's really tricky.
Yeah, and as in the psychotherapeutic world, we steer away from advice anyway, don't we? It's not something we do. We're more about holding a mirror up, like you just gave in that example there, saying, "This is what I've noticed."
And I mean also. You must have had it drummed into you. We had it drummed into us. You don't try and give your friends therapy. You don't give your family therapy. Because you're too close, and you have to detach. It's only people who. If the guy woke up one day and thought, "What am I doing?" and went to his friend and said, "I keep doing this and I'm not feeling so comfortable with that anymore." Then if the friend, knew what to do, the friend could talk. But just to leap in and say something, it's the whole addiction thing is huge. So all the behavior that's going on is bound up with that addiction. If it was just something else, if you took the anorexia out of it, if for instance, his wife, I don't know, if she had an obsession about shopping or something like that, then it would be different, because it's not such a red hot potato. It would be easier for somebody to try and talk about it, but no. Yeah. The A word is just not mentioned. It's like it's not happening. It's like everything, even though the bones are sticking out, you can see through a thick coat, bones sticking out behind, can't do anything, unfortunately. It's really hard.
The people have to realise for themselves and want to seek help. Yeah.
And I mean, in London, you have an AA meeting, as you know, every hour, on the hour, somewhere. There are places to go for everything: codependence, anorexia, alcohol, gambling, sex addiction, the works. So you can't force people to do it. You can't force people to go. And it's very sad to watch. You're watching somebody literally, harming their health.
Yeah.
Right.
One more question, if it's okay. One more question. Yeah. I can take it, or you can take it as you wish. So I'm not sure who this is from, but I thought people who are anorexic were suffering from depression.
Well, they could be depressed as well, but the disease in itself is individual. Just as it's like any disease, you can have the secondary addiction in there, or you can have a secondary disease in there with it. So somebody can be an alcoholic and can be depressed at the same time, just as somebody who is anorexic or bulimic can be depressed as well. And it's very possible they are, because they're not feeling good. They're suppressing their feelings, and they're not feeling good at all. So a gambler, somebody with a gambling addiction, could be depressed. But it's not the depression that brings on the anorexia. The anorexia, there's a specific way that starts, and the person might get depressed during or part of the time that they are anorexic or whatever, but it's the disease itself that's the main factor, and the other things can slide in and slide out of that while that's happening.
Yeah, my understanding of all eating disorders, and in fact all addictions, is that it's an attempt to cope with emotional pain, whether that's trauma from childhood or just something that's not been healed. Yeah, it's just swallow down the pain, not to feel it. Yeah. And it's also in this particular instance, it's also the need to feel in control, because while someone is preventing themselves from taking in nourishment, they feel in a way that they are in control. They're in control of their body, they're in control of their life.
But eating disorders, it's really hard in therapy to work with people with eating disorders, because it is ingrained. It is really ingrained. It does sometimes work, but in the UK, I think with a lot of, I've seen a few programs. I mean, I've sat in on Robert Lefebvre's supervision in South Kensington and seen people in a group supervision session talking about their problems. But outside the private sector, kids are sent miles away from their families. They're in total isolation, and sometimes with disastrous results. I mean, in the UK, the scale of treating eating disorders isn't the achievement scale, if you like, isn't very high. It's really hard, and it's a long process. It's a really long process. So, should we move on?
So just a comment here, I think, rather than a question. So Chris Horton saying, my friend's daughter is anorexic. Her mum would always make unpleasant comments about large people when she was growing up. So maybe that played into the psyche there in a conscious or unconscious way.
Do you know, I had a client a long time ago, maybe 20 years ago, and her mother was very controlling. She didn't have an eating disorder, but after she left home and started work, she developed certain allergies. She developed an allergy against wheat, so she had to eat all gluten-free products. And I can't remember there were a couple more allergies that she had to avoid these certain foods. And she told me that she used to go and visit her mum maybe once a month, because she worked in London, her mother lived in the country somewhere. And she said, whenever I walk through the gate and up to the front door, my heart just sinks, because I know what's going to happen. And her mother's delighted to see her and invites her in. And she goes for a weekend, obviously, so she stays 2 nights. And she says, I get in and I can smell the food. And there is my mum. She'd made a beautiful table and all the food she's cooked. And it's all the food I can't eat. And she says, the first day, because she says, sometimes I take a bit of food with me, my food. But she says the first night I indulge my mother and I feel bad if I refuse to eat. She's been cooking for hours and I refuse to eat the food that she puts in front of me. But she said, I suffer for days afterwards. And we worked on that, and we got to a place where she was able to see how the minute she opened the gate, she regressed right back to a little girl. And she was unable to speak to her mother about it. She told her mother many times, but her mother just wasn't hearing it. It's a tough one.
Thanks for that. So, yes, onwards.
Right. So, how codependent are you? I can still tick one of these. You must have had this lecture, Paul. It's second-year lecture. Yeah. So here's the questions. Do you often feel frightened and nervous of other people? If you see a fight in the street, does your heart beat faster as if you are somehow responsible for it? Do you constantly want approval from other people? Do angry people frighten you? Do you get very upset by personal criticism? Do you feel responsible for the other people in your life? Do you ever feel your family would fall apart without you? Do you ever feel guilty when you stand up for yourself instead of giving in to the wishes of others? Do you find it hard to refuse a request for help? Do you tend to attract or choose people who seem to need a lot of help? Would you call yourself a perfectionist? Do you tend to be your own sternest critic? Do you seem to come alive in a crisis? Do other people see you as one who copes wonderfully? Do you ever feel that other people don't appreciate all you do for them? Do you ever feel that people tend to abandon you through no fault of your own? Would you call yourself a very loyal person? Do you find it difficult to have fun? Do you always try to avoid conflict instead of facing up to it? And finally, do you ever feel you could have been more successful if other people hadn't gotten in your way?
Interesting questions. If you've ticked any of those, folks, and you want to share what your score was, then feel free to do so. No judgment here.
No, and I can tell you what mine was. There were a few on there. I can't remember all of them, but the one that I do remember, and I still have a bit of issue with this one, which is, do angry people frighten you? Well, they don't frighten me anymore, but I have difficulty sometimes. I feel uncomfortable sometimes around angry people. Not all the time. It depends on the situation. But at the time when we did those questions, I think I had about 4 or 5 ticked off easily. So I will just tell you a little anecdote here. When I was doing my training, I had a supervisor who you must know called Susie Saunders, right? And in my first session with her, when I saw her for years, a long time, but if in my first session with her, I'd gone in and said something like a bit of an angry remark, like, well, you know, I've had a lot of supervisors and I felt that they didn't really live up to my expectations. One eyebrow would have gone up. And you know what she looks like, right? And she's a bit scary. And she would have said, well, isn't that interesting? I wonder if you're thinking that I also won't live up to your expectations. She would have confronted it head on. In fact, I don't know if it was her or somebody else who told me that they had a couple, they were seeing a couple, and it was the husband who called the therapist to arrange the session before they'd got into their first session. So he called the therapist to arrange the session and said to the therapist, they'd made arrangements, yes, we'll come at so-and-so, what time, whatever. And he said, oh, I have to tell you that my wife sued our last therapist. Can you imagine how Susie would have answered that one?
I wonder if you're thinking of suing me. Good luck with that.
Yeah. So Pia Mellody, in a book entitled Facing Codependence, writes 5 symptoms form the core of the disease. Codependents have difficulty experiencing appropriate levels of self-esteem, setting functioning boundaries, owning and expressing their own reality, taking care of their adult needs and wants, experiencing and expressing their reality in a moderate way, so without getting angry or verbally abusive or whatever. And she says if codependents have any kind of esteem, It's not self-esteem. It's what she calls other esteem, which is based on external things, including some of these: how they look, how much money they make, who they know, what kind of car they drive, what kind of job they have, how well their children perform, how powerful and important or attractive their spouse is, the degrees they have earned, how well they perform at activities in which others value excellence. And the car bit reminds me of your Eckhart Tolle tape, which I listened to today, because he made a big thing about the people need a better car than everybody else in order that they get approval. So again, codependence is a huge subject, and most of us walking around have some aspects of codependence in our behavior. It's passed down, so it's mirrored. So, you know, it's inevitable that, you know, we've all got aspects of this.
There seems to me, Jackie, to be some overlap between codependence and the pleasers, because codependence, my understanding is, in order to feel happy in yourself, it has to be coming from externally. The other person has to be happy. The situation has to be right. And that, I think, there's some overlap there, I think, with people pleasing. In order, the other person, you've got to
yes, absolutely.
And the low self-esteem in that as well. Yeah.
Well, the people pleasing is an agenda, of course. If I do this, this is what I hope to get back in return. And it's safe, because people need to feel safe. So it's safe if I do this, because then I'm sure that I get a reciprocal feeling or activity or whatever it is in return, and I feel in a safe place. Of course, when it doesn't work is when somebody does, and that's agendas are a huge thing. When people have agendas, as you know, agendas usually backfire. So I need that person to do this and do that and do the other, and you can bet your life it will backfire. And I can give you a little story about myself, and I'm not proud of it, but I was I doing my training then? Maybe I was in my foundation year or something. And a friend had moved from my area to Oxford, and she very kindly invited all her friends from my area to go for a lunch at her home, a beautiful home in Oxford. And this was my thinking, and this is agenda-driven thinking, right? My thinking was, I can imagine the others, they'll be just taking a little pot to plant or something. I want to take something beautiful. So I went off to a store and I bought a beautiful framed piece of embroidery for her daughter's room. And it was quite big. I mean, it was quite a big picture. And we get there, we all troop in, and she greets everybody at the door. And most people have brought a box of chocolates or a plant or something, you know, the dimensions of a plant or a box of chocolates, not too heavy, not too big, until I troop up with mine. And of course, she's opening the others. The plant, she doesn't have to, because she can see it's a plant, but the small gifts, she's opening them as they're giving them to her. So I give her mine, but it's so bloody big. Of course, she can't, take the time up to open it. So she said, I'll look at it later. And she puts it away. And then I'm devastated, because I wanted to be the star. I wanted my gift to be the shining star. And she was a lovely woman. And she called me a couple of days later and told me how wonderful this was. She'd put it in her daughter's room. Her daughter loved it. And you know what? It just fell flat. And I was talking to someone who was about 3 years ahead of me in the training, and she laughed her head off when I told her this story and said, whoa, didn't you get shot down? There you had an agenda, and look how it backfired.
Because you wanted that audience to see that you had the golden gift.
I wanted mine to be the best.
Yeah.
I went out of my way to get something bigger than anybody else would get. I wanted mine to be the best.
Well, thank you for sharing that, making yourself vulnerable in doing so, and there's no judgment here anyway. So.
Well, no, we all this is part and parcel of the work. This is what you go through. This is the work you do, and yeah, you have to name it.
Yep. So, Karen, thank you, Karen. Going back to the list of codependent traits, I can still tick quite a few of those. I still hate conflict, and angry people do make me feel uneasy. I think that's probably fairly common, that people try and avoid conflict, and anger can be frightening for people.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, it's not pleasant, is it, to be next to somebody who's shouting and screaming and looks like they might get violent or whatever. It's unnerving to be next to somebody like that.
Yeah.
But of course...
sorry, go ahead.
No, it's okay.
I was going to say, especially if we've experienced that as a child, if we've had a very angry parent and we were small and incapable of dealing with that or standing up to it, there can be echoes of that in adulthood as well.
Well, you can imagine as an adult, if you feel uncomfortable, how's a child going to feel? A child who thinks the adults, they all know what they're doing, and if they're mad like that, that must be my fault.
Yes, and we all have that inner child in us still. So, feel it as an adult, feel it as a child. And I suppose, I'm not trying to give advice here, Karen, but perhaps it might be useful to offer that anger, there's usually something underneath anger. So when someone is shouting, slamming doors, criticizing somebody, blaming people for everything else.
Well, they're hurting, aren't they? They're in pain.
Yeah,
it's somebody who's in pain who reacts like that.
Yeah.
They're not feeling good. They're in pain. So they've had a reaction against something, and they're reacting, outwardly and in full view of everyone. So they're in pain. They're not in a good place.
Absolutely. So even the angry person has their wounded inner child. Absolutely. And they're acting out in that way, but it's usually coming from a place of fear and wounding. So that may or may not be helpful. Okay, onwards, Jackie.
Well, that's about me, because I can't start. I could start, but I think it's too tight to start on anything else. I can just tell you that part 2 is going to look at the wounding and healing of men. And James Hollis, this is from his book, The Under Saturn's Shadow. And I'll also be talking, there's a woman, an author called Linda Shears Leonard, who wrote a book called, it's an old book, she wrote a book called The Wounded Woman. And this is looking at the girl's relationship with father. And we will look at the various aspects of the woman in this category, and we'll look at the something that you must be familiar with, the puella, the puer aeternus. This aspect of a woman who can be 60 years old but can have the innocence of a child of 20 or 18 or 15 or whatever, at that very innocent part, and the relationship with the girl's relationship with father. And then I wanted to do something about love addiction. So I'll have a go at that.
Great stuff.
But
so that's going to be next Monday.
Next Monday, so I better get moving because I've only just started that. So yes.
So folks, if you have any final comments or questions, do feel free to fire them across now. Karen is feeding back on the angry comment. Her stepdad used to get angry, and she completely agrees with everything says. Thank you. Very good. Welcome. So Jackie, if no more comments or questions come through, then thank you once again for all the work you put into this.
You're very welcome, and thanks for everyone who came. Thank you. If you're interested in the other stuff, then that's what we're going to be looking at. I think for men particularly, it would be interesting because the mother-son stuff is big big stuff.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Excellent. Lovely.
Okay.
So thanks again for your time, and Hive people, thank you for your interactions, and thanks for being here. I hope you found it useful. Got lots of thank yous coming in, and part 2 sounds fab. Oh, and a question for Jackie. What was the title of some of those books, the book about the innocent woman? Do you want to reel through those now, or do you want to send...
No, I can tell you, this is the, for part 2.
Title of some of those books and the book about the innocent woman, please.
This is the wounded woman. Oops.
So it's the Puella, I think, is the one that Karen's...
Yes.
Yeah, is that the right one? Yeah.
This one. It's this one.
Okay.
It's really good. It really impressed. I read this book years ago, and it really impressed me. Alice Miller, The Drama of Being a Child, and of course John Bradshaw, Healing the Shame That Binds You, and the Pia Mellody. This is an excellent book as well, and it's very old. Facing Codependence, Pia Mellody, and then the man. Where's he gone? This one is excellent. Under Satan's shadow. This is the mother-son relationship.
Under Saturn's shadow, James Hollis.
Yeah, Under Saturn. Oh, yes.
Brilliant. Super. That's great. Thank you very much, and look forward to
everybody
again next Monday.
Thank you very much, Paul. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you, folks. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.